A single dad in a faded charcoal suit standing at the entrance of the most expensive wedding in Chicago. And beside him, holding his hand tightly, was his 7-year-old daughter Lily wearing a simple pale blue dress stitched by hand. The security guard blocked the entrance instantly. "Invitations?" Daniel calmly handed over the embossed envelope. The guard frowned. Then checked again. Then looked up slowly at Daniel's worn shoes. "You sure you're in the right place?" Several guests nearby laughed quietly. Lily squeezed her father's hand harder. Daniel ignored them. "Yes." The guard hesitated before finally stepping aside. Inside, the ballroom looked like a palace built for royalty. Massive flower walls climbed toward the ceiling. Diamond lights reflected off glass towers filled with white roses. Men in designer tuxedos and women dripping in jewelry turned to stare as Daniel and Lily walked through the crowd. Daniel kept his head high. But he could already feel the judgment crawling across the room. Whispers spread fast. "Who invited him? Maybe he's staff." "No, look at the little girl. He looks broke." Lily looked up nervously. "Daddy, maybe we should go." Daniel forced a smile. "We were invited. We stay." But before they could take another step, a sharp voice sliced through the room. "Well, this is embarrassing." Every head turned toward the staircase. The bride stood there. Vanessa Sinclair? Beautiful. Cold. Wrapped in a custom diamond-covered wedding gown worth more than most houses. Her wealthy family owned half the city's luxury hotels, and tonight she looked exactly like the kind of woman who believed the world existed beneath her heels. Her eyes locked onto Daniel. Then narrowed instantly. "You actually came?" The room went dead quiet. Daniel answered calmly. "You invited me." Vanessa laughed softly, but there was poison behind it. "That invitation was sent before I knew what happened to you." Lily looked confused. "Daddy, you know the bride?" Daniel didn't answer. Vanessa slowly walked down the staircase, every camera in the room following her. She stopped directly in front of Daniel and looked him up and down. "My God!" she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You really did become pathetic." Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Vanessa smirked. "I heard rumors after your company collapsed. But I didn't expect this." Her eyes dropped toward Lily. "And you brought your daughter too?" Lily hid slightly behind her father. Daniel spoke quietly. "Don't involve my child." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Then maybe don't drag her into places where she clearly doesn't belong." The guests gasped. Daniel's face hardened. Still, he stayed calm. Because years ago, he had loved this woman. Before she chose money over loyalty. Before she disappeared the moment his life burned to ashes. Vanessa leaned closer. "Look around, Daniel. Do you honestly think you belong here dressed like that?" Daniel replied evenly. "A wedding invitation usually means yes." A few people laughed nervously. Vanessa's smile vanished. "You were supposed to decline out of dignity." "I don't remember dignity mattering much to you." That hit harder than Daniel intended. Her eyes flashed with anger. Then she smiled again, worse this time. "Security," she said loudly. "Please escort him out." Lily's eyes widened instantly. "Daddy." Daniel crouched beside her calmly. "It's okay." "No," Vanessa interrupted coldly. "Actually, it's not okay. My wedding isn't a charity event." The room became painfully silent. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Daniel slowly stood again. Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes now. But before he could speak, a deep voice echoed from the ballroom entrance. "Then maybe you should escort me out too." Every head snapped toward the doors. And Vanessa turned pale instantly. A tall man stepped inside wearing a black tailored tuxedo worth more than most luxury cars. Confident. Sharp. Powerful. The groom. Adrian Kingsley. Billionaire investor. Owner of Kingsley Global Holdings. One of the richest men in America. And he wasn't smiling. He walked directly past the frozen guests. Past the photographers. Past the wedding planners panicking in the corners. Straight toward Daniel. Vanessa's voice trembled slightly. "Adrian, what are you doing?" But Adrian ignored her completely. Then, in front of everyone, he stopped before Daniel. And lowered his head respectfully. The ballroom gasped. "Sir?" Adrian said quietly. "I'm sorry I'm late." Nobody breathed. Vanessa blinked rapidly. "W what?" Daniel sighed softly. You didn't need to make a scene. A scene? Adrian turned slowly toward Vanessa. The scene started when your guests humiliated the man who saved my life. The silence became suffocating. Vanessa looked like the ground vanished beneath her feet. Daniel glanced at Lily gently. Sweetheart, go stand by Uncle Adrian for a second. Lily nodded obediently. Adrian smiled warmly at her. You've gotten taller since last month. The guests stared in disbelief. Vanessa's face lost all color. You know each other? Adrian looked at her like she'd insulted him. Know him? He laughed once in disbelief. Vanessa, without Daniel Carter, I'd be dead. Shock exploded across the room. Cameras immediately started recording again. Vanessa's lips parted. What are you talking about? Adrian turned toward the crowd slowly. 3 years ago, when Kingsley Global collapsed during the cyber attacks, everyone abandoned me. Investors fled. Executives resigned. Banks circled like vultures. He pointed toward Daniel. This man rebuilt my entire infrastructure in 72 hours. Guests exchanged stunned looks. Adrian continued. While everyone else protected their money, he protected my employees. Daniel looked uncomfortable now. But Adrian wasn't finished. He worked 18 hours a day for weeks. Slept in server rooms. Sold his own assets to keep operations alive. Vanessa whispered. That's impossible. Adrian's eyes darkened. You want to know the funny part? Nobody moved. He never asked for recognition. The room stayed silent. Adrian looked directly at Vanessa now. But after saving my company, Daniel returned home and discovered his own business partner had stolen everything from him. A ripple of shock moved across the ballroom. Daniel looked away quietly. Adrian's voice hardened further. And while he fought bankruptcy alone, the woman he planned to marry disappeared overnight. Vanessa looked like she might collapse. People were staring at her now. Judging her. Whispering. Daniel finally spoke quietly. Enough, Adrian. No, Adrian replied. Not tonight. He turned toward the guests. You all looked at his suit and decided his value. Nobody dared respond. Adrian stepped beside Daniel. This man is the reason thousands of my employees still feed their families. Vanessa suddenly forced a laugh. Weak. Desperate. Adrian, you're exaggerating. He looked at her slowly. Then reached into his jacket. And pulled out a document. You're right, he said coldly. I forgot one detail. He handed the paper to her. Her hands shook reading it. Then her entire body froze. No. Daniel closed his eyes slightly. Adrian spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Daniel Carter owns 30% of Kingsley Global. The ballroom erupted. Some guests literally stood from their tables. Phones appeared everywhere. Vanessa's breathing became uneven. T30%? Adrian nodded calmly. He became a silent partner 2 years ago. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I told you not to announce that publicly. And I ignored you. Vanessa looked like she couldn't process reality anymore. Because 30% of Kingsley Global meant only one thing. Daniel wasn't poor. He was worth billions. But unlike everyone else in that ballroom, he never dressed like it. Never acted like it. Never flaunted it. Vanessa stared at him in horror. You let everyone think you were broke? Daniel finally looked at her directly. You made that decision yourself. That sentence cut deeper than any scream could. The guests who mocked him earlier suddenly avoided eye contact. The security guard looked sick. Vanessa swallowed hard. Daniel, why didn't you tell me? He smiled sadly. Because the last time I lost everything, you taught me exactly how people behave when money disappears. Her eyes watered instantly. But Daniel's expression never changed. Lily walked back to him quietly and held his hand. And somehow that small gesture carried more dignity than the entire ballroom combined. Vanessa stepped closer carefully. I didn't know. No, Daniel replied softly. You didn't care to know. Another brutal silence followed. Then an older man from the crowd suddenly spoke. Wait. Daniel Carter? Daniel turned slightly. The man's eyes widened. You're the Daniel Carter who built Nexeron Systems? Several businessmen nearby suddenly reacted. Oh my God! That was him? I thought he vanished. One wealthy investor rushed forward instantly. Mr. Carter, I've been trying to contact you for months. Daniel stepped back calmly. Not tonight. Suddenly everyone wanted his attention. The same people who laughed minutes earlier now smiled desperately. Offering drinks. Shaking hands. Pretending respect. Lily whispered quietly. Daddy, why are they acting different now? Daniel looked down at her. And the sadness in his eyes broke something inside several people nearby. Because some people only see worth when money enters the room. Even Adrian looked emotional hearing that. Vanessa's mascara was beginning to run now. Daniel, please. But before she could finish, another voice interrupted. Excuse me. Everyone turned. An elderly woman slowly stood from one of the front tables. Adrian's grandmother. Eleanor Kingsley. The true owner behind the Kingsley fortune. And one of the most feared women in American business. She walked slowly toward Daniel. Then smiled warmly at Lily. So this is the young lady I've heard about. Lily nodded shyly. Eleanor looked at Daniel. You still haven't accepted my offer. Daniel sighed. Mrs. Kingsley. You deserve it. Vanessa looked confused again. Offer? Eleanor faced the room. Daniel refused a $5 billion executive contract because he wanted more time raising his daughter. The silence became almost painful. Several women looked stunned. One man muttered, $5 billion. Eleanor continued proudly. In 40 years of business, I've never met a man harder to buy. Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable now. But Eleanor smiled. That's why we trust him. Vanessa finally broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Because now she understood the full truth. The man she threw away years ago, the man she humiliated tonight, wasn't just wealthy. He was respected, loved, trusted, and completely beyond her reach now. She whispered shakily, I made a mistake. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then answered with terrifying calmness. No. A mistake is spilling wine on a dress. He glanced around the ballroom. This was a choice. Vanessa covered her mouth. The words hit like a knife. Adrian looked deeply uncomfortable now. Because this wedding had become a disaster. But Daniel suddenly placed a hand on his shoulder. You should go marry her. The room froze again. Even Vanessa looked shocked. Adrian stared at him carefully. After this? Daniel nodded once. If you love her, then don't let tonight define your future. Vanessa burst into tears completely. Because after everything she'd done, he still showed more grace than she deserved. Adrian looked conflicted. Then slowly turned toward Vanessa. But before he spoke, Lily tugged Daniel's sleeve softly. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart? Can we go home now? Daniel smiled gently. Yeah. I think we can. He turned to leave. But suddenly Eleanor Kingsley spoke again. Wait. Daniel stopped. She looked around the ballroom coldly. Then announced, Before Mr. Carter leaves, I'd like everyone here to remember something. Every guest went silent instantly. Eleanor's voice became razor-sharp. A cheap suit does not mean a cheap man. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She continued, Some of the wealthiest people in this room are spiritually bankrupt. Her eyes swept across the guests. And some of the poorest-looking people carry more honor than entire bloodlines. Several guests lowered their heads. Vanessa cried silently. Then Eleanor looked at Daniel one final time. You raised your daughter well. Daniel's expression softened slightly. Thank you. Then he took Lily's hand and walked toward the ballroom doors. No music played. No one spoke. The crowd parted silently for the single dad they mocked less than an hour earlier. But just before Daniel reached the exit, Vanessa called out one last time. Daniel! He paused. Her voice cracked completely. If things had been different, would you have forgiven me? The ballroom waited. Daniel stood still for several seconds. Then finally answered without turning around. I already did. Vanessa's tears fell harder. But forgiveness, he said quietly, doesn't mean you get the person back. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a ballroom full of rich people who suddenly felt very small.